We've been stuck in traffic for 8 hours now. If we leave our vehicle, we will die. My wife Lauren is in her car right behind my truck with our 2 cats, but I can't get out and see her. The last guy who got out was shot in the legs and then run over by a tank. The drive was beautiful most of the way, and Lauren and I spent a lot of time on speakerphone with each other. My only complaint was that there was a really bad thunderstorm that lasted for hours, but I thought it would go away and that everything would be fine beside our destination. I took a look at the navigation app on my phone, but it didn't show any red areas of heavy delay. It also had some trouble showing my exact location, so I just lit a cigarette and figured it would just be a few minutes. After about 15 minutes, I called Lauren. "How's it going back there?" I asked. In the background, I could hear our cats going nuts. "Not great," said Lauren. "You hear Hanky and Hattie howling? They started up as soon as the traffic began." "What's going on?" "Must be an accident that just happened. My phone usually gives me a heads up if there's planned construction or something." I heard one of the cats hiss while the other one yelled. "I'm so tired," said Lauren. "I know, me too. Let's stop and get something to eat once we're through." "All right, love you," I responded. "Sorry about the cats, love you," said Lauren. I hung up and tried to get something on the radio. Upon turning it on, I heard some kind of distorted robotic voice reading off a list of numbers and random words strung together across the whole radio band. I couldn't take it, so I shut it off. I picked my phone back up and went to check Twitter. All I got was the one Google dinosaur game that came up whenever there was no internet. Strange, since I'd had signal throughout the rest of the trip. I thought it was just the weather, but the reality was so much more horrifying. Finally, Twitter loaded. After a half hour had passed, I started to get antsy, and so did everyone else. People were sticking their heads out the window to try to see what was going on, but it was no use. The line of cars seemed endless. A few people got out of their vehicles to try to get a better look. I got out too and started walking to Lauren's car. When I was halfway there, a voice cut into the air. It sounded like someone shouting through a bullhorn. "Return immediately to your vehicles. No one is permitted to be outside. This is your only warning. If you do not heed it, there will be severe consequences." What the F is going on? Some guy shouted in a thick Boston accent. He was standing a few car lengths in front of me. An instant later, he was down on the ground, not moving. I didn't see what happened exactly, but that was enough to make me hustle back to my truck. I tried calling Lauren again. When she answered, all that I could hear were broken flashes of the cat screaming, and Lauren sounding scared and begging to know what was happening. "I don't know," I said, not sure that she could hear it. "Maybe they're searching for a criminal or something. I don't know." Then we were disconnected. A minute later, an ambulance was wailing its way down the right-hand shoulder. It stopped just past my truck, and 2 EMTs jumped out of the back. They closed the doors behind them, but I saw that there was somebody else in there. Somebody dressed in riot gear, holding a big gun. The EMTs dragged the guy with the Boston accent by the arms over to the ambulance. They opened the doors and sort of tossed him in, and then followed behind. I saw the riot gear person again for a second, and then the door slammed shut and the ambulance sped off down the shoulder out of sight. Somebody 4 cars ahead of me got the idea to follow the ambulance out of there. I watched as a red car with a New Jersey license plate tore into the shoulder lane and sped after the ambulance. I tried calling Lauren to ask her if she thought we should try it too. It was a ballsy move for sure, but she had sounded at the end of her rope stuck in there with our wailing cats, so I thought she might be willing to give it a shot. This time, the call didn't even go through. I was getting ready to try calling again when I heard this loud blast. A puff of smoke blossomed somewhere up ahead, and all of a sudden, there were chunks of a car flying through the air. It was the red car from before, and as I watched the flaming tire roll to a stop against the highway divider, I decided not to replicate the maneuver. I heard the blast of a horn behind me, and looked in the rear view to see that Lauren had her arm out the window, moving her hand around in a circle. Finally, it hit me that she was telling me to roll down my window, so that's what I did. "Can you hear me?" she shouted. "I can. I can even hear the cats. They sounded really freaked out," I said. "I think we're in some kind of military lockdown. Maybe I think we have to just sit tight here." "Can you throw me a bottle?" asked Lauren. "A bottle like Gatorade or something. I know that you've probably got 10 of them in your front seat." I asked her, "What are you going to do with the bottle?" "It's not something I want to shout out for the whole world to hear," said Lauren. "Let's just say we've been here a while, and I don't think we're coming to a rest stop soon enough." Finally, I understood what she meant. I reached over and grabbed a bottle and chucked it out the window, but it was a bad throw and bounced off the hood of Lauren's car. I tried again, and this time she caught it. She rolled up her window, and in the rearview mirror, I watched her fuss around as she presumably tried to pee into the thing. This was when the fleet of massive trucks started rolling in on the southbound side of the highway. Some of them had cranes sitting on long flatbeds, and others had big chunks of some kind of metal material. Soon the southbound side was jammed up with these giant trucks in their haul. Then they started to get to work. "What are they doing?" asked Lauren, after rolling her window back up. "Are they building an effing wall?" That is exactly what it looked like they were doing. One crane would take a massive chunk of material and lift it into place, either next to or on top of another chunk. "Yes, they're walling us in," I shouted. I checked my phone for the 1000th time. I finally had 1 bar of connection and used it to call 911. A lady answered and said, "911, what's your emergency?" I said, "Well, we're in this weird traffic jam and people are dying here. Cars are exploding. They're building a wall around us. They're trapping us here." I know that sounds crazy. There was a long silence on the other end. I thought maybe we've been disconnected, but then I heard her voice again, crystal clear. "Sir, I'm going to need you to remain calm and stay in your vehicle and roll down the passenger window of your car, not the driver's side." Then I heard the tapping at my window. There was a lady cop standing there, holding a cell phone up to her ear. My heart jumped up into my throat, and my instinct was to slam my foot on the gas pedal, but there was nowhere to go. I rolled down the window. "You reported an emergency?" asked the cop. Everything looks okay to me. I will give you the benefit of the doubt this time, but remember that we also very strongly frown upon fraudulent 911 calls. You could be charged for that, sir. It's no joke." "Oh," I said, trying to hold it together. "I'm sorry about that. I did think that something bad was going on, but now I see that everything is okay. Thanks for checking in." "It's no problem at all, sir," said the cop, smiling. "And remember, stay in your vehicle." The cop nodded and then walked off down the line of cars. I waited a few minutes and then called out to Lauren. "I think we're effed," I said. "I called 911 and the cop that was just here, she's the one who picked up. She said everything's fine, but it's not." That's when the guy jumped out of his car and made a break for the wooded area to the right of the highway, and that's when they shot him in the legs. I heard him cry out and watched him hit the ground. I heard a loud continuous rumble interspersed with snaps from the woods. Then I saw the tank. It didn't so much emerge from the woods as it destroyed the woods and its wake beyond it. I saw another enormous wall. We were walled in from 2 sides, and my guess was that we were going to soon be walled in from 4 sides. The tank crushed the man like he was a particularly small ant. They are working on the roof now. It's almost done. Once the roof is on, I have a feeling that I won't get any reception at all. Before that happens, I'm hoping for one more spike so that I can get some help, but I don't know if this is on the news or not. I thought it was just a traffic jam, so that's probably how they're playing it off. They probably have rerouted traffic around us by now. I don't know what this is, but there are now dozens of heavily armed people in riot gear going from car to car. Sometimes they drag somebody out and carry them screaming off to what remains of the wooded area where they disappear from sight. They're almost at my truck now. Why, my father had a strange obsession with clocks. His favorite one was a red and white German clock made in the 1940s. It was given to him by his grandfather, which was bought off of an ex-soldier in Argentina after World War II. My dad told me to never take it off the wall, but after finding what was hidden in the clock, I deeply regret ignoring his orders. After my dad died, I was in charge of cleaning out all his stuff and putting it into boxes. Per my father's will, most of his collection was sold off at auction, and the money was put in a bank account to keep my mom comfortable after he was gone. Hundreds of watches, clocks, and a few antique chronometers all sold. Everything except his old German clock that he left to me, and insisted that I keep it in my possession. I brought it home and set it up in an unused bedroom that I kept telling myself I was going to convert into an office. The first night, I could hear it through the walls. Tick, tick, tick. 2 rooms down, and it was still burrowing its way into my skull and filling my dreams with a sense of urgency and panic. The ticking of the clock always made me feel like time was running out, as if I could sense the end of my life closing in on me. It didn't make for a restful night. In the morning, I moved it into the garage and headed for work. My head ached and my eyes burned the entire day. I figured I was sick with something. I ended up knocking off 2 hours early and heading home. I thought a little sleep would make everything better. Tick, tick, tick. The sound of the old German clock greeted me as I walked through the front door. While I was out, someone had set it up on the counter. At least I assumed someone must have, even though I live alone, except for a great orange cat I rescued from a shelter 3 years ago. My alarm system keeps a log of every time the code is entered, and I checked it to see if my mom had dropped by unannounced. No one had been in since I said it that morning. Could I have done it? I've never been a morning person. One time I managed to put my sunglasses in the freezer instead of an ice tray and didn't notice until I went to make dinner. That was when I did something stupid, something I've come to regret over the last few days. I shrugged it off. I put the clock back in the spare room from earlier. Tick, tick, tick. The noise followed me throughout the house as I went about my nightly routine. I fell asleep to the sounds of the ticking clock and had a nightmare of screaming and the crunch of bones being ground between a giant clock's ancient brass gears. A nightmare I don't think I've had since I was a kid. When I woke up, the clock seemed impossibly loud, and my mouth felt like I'd spent the night sucking on cotton balls. I was in a foul mood as I got out of bed. Then I took the clock out to the trash can on the curb. The ticking clock didn't miss a beat as I crammed it into the half-full black trash can, and there was no question in my mind that it ticked louder than it had the day before, and I glanced around my quiet street, hoping that the neighbors didn't hear it. I came home from work that night to find the clock waiting for me on my kitchen counter. The alarm showed nothing. No one had been in or out the entire day. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I didn't do either. Instead, I called for my cat, that giant ball of fluff who had kept me company from the moment I moved into my own place. I screamed until my throat was hoarse, checked under the bed, and in his favorite hiding spot underneath the sink. Finally, after I'd checked everywhere I could think of, I gave up. The old clock ticked away the whole time, like the laughter of a mad clockwork man mocking my search. My hands shook as I snatched up the old clock and tucked it under one arm. 3 summers ago, I built a fire pit behind my house, a place where I could roast hot dogs and drink a cold beer. It hasn't seen half as much use as I'd like, but it was the perfect place to do away with the damnable clock. I poured half a can of gasoline on the damn thing before lighting it up. The flames leapt into the air, nearly reaching the trees 30 feet above my head. The well-oiled wood crackled and sparked as the edges curled and split. I watched until long after the sun set, and nothing was left but ash. Before I went to bed that night, I searched the house for my cat again, even though part of me knew I wouldn't find him. He never left a speck of food in his bowl, not even on the rare occasion where I accidentally fed him twice. If he was in the house, his bowl would be clean. I gave up close to midnight and crawled into bed exhausted and a little heartsick. Tick, tick, tick. I woke up just before dawn with the sound of the clock banging in my ears. It was coming from the kitchen. I couldn't bear to face it. I lay in bed listening to the loud tick of the old German clock for hours, praying that it was all a terrible dream, unable to get back to sleep. When my alarm went off, I called in and told my boss I was coming down with the flu. The way I'd been the past 2 days, he didn't seem surprised to hear it. It was the sound of the front door opening that finally forced me out of bed. Janine, the young woman who worked for the cleaning service I'd come in once a week, was surprised to see me home. We'd only met twice before, the first time when I hired the service, then once when the office had been shut down last winter due to some burst pipes. "That's new," she said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. "What?" I asked, still groggy. "The clock." "Right." I forced my eyes toward the old German clock. The clock I only then realized I had hoped was just a symptom of a psychotic break. Janine had ripped that delusion away by acknowledging the damn thing. It sat on the kitchen counter where I knew it would be. If a clock were capable of it, it would have been mocking me. "I'll be in my room. Just lock up when you leave." I retreated to my room before Janine could respond, and stayed there until well into the afternoon. Janine never stopped by to let me know she was going. That night I moved the clock back to its new home in the spare room. It ticked madly, the metal pendulum safe behind the unbroken glass that I had watched crack and blacken in a fire. Holding it in my hands, I swear I felt a pulsing warmth beneath the wood, like a black heart pumping warm blood through the mechanical guts of the old timepiece. The weekend came, and I was grateful that no one would want to see me until Monday. My nights were filled with dreams of death and destruction, and of an ancient forest wreathed in fog, where thin, wasted branches grabbed at me, and thorny vines seemed to leap forward of their own accord. I was starting to hear the wind blowing through the forest's ancient, gnarled trees, even when I was awake. The ticking of the clock sounded more like a mad rhythmic pulse with every passing hour. Sunday morning, the police knocked on my door, pulling me out of a hazy nightmare where a ticking forest tried to strangle me with smooth, polished vines. 2 plainclothes detectives stood at the door, and I invited them in wordlessly. My eyes were watering, and I was dressed in pajamas that hadn't been changed since Thursday night. The clock ticked on from the kitchen, the spot it had chosen for itself. The first thing the detectives did was ask if I was okay. "I'm fine, just a bit under the weather. Can I help you with something?" I answered, not feeling fine at all. "We're checking into a missing person, Janine Blakely. According to her employer, she never showed up after her rounds on Friday. Your house was on her schedule the day she went missing." I could practically feel the color draining from my face as the detective spoke. I collapsed into a nearby chair, the legs scraping against the floor as I went. The detectives watched me with a wary eye, their hands fidgeting dangerously close to the guns at their waists. "Missing? Janine is missing." "Sir, did you see Mrs. Blakely the day she went missing?" "Yes, she came by at around 10 a.m. yesterday. The last time she reported in was just before she got here then. Did you see anything suspicious? Notice anyone following her?" "No, we barely spoke. I stayed in the bedroom while she cleaned up out here." "Sir, do you mind if we have a look around?" the lead detective asked. The way he said it was more of a demand than a request, and I had a feeling that refusing him wouldn't buy me much time anyway. "Sure, go right ahead." I leaned back in my chair, rubbing at my temples. 3 days of constant ticking and erratic nightmare-filled sleep had brought on a migraine. The detective searched the house while I sat by, answering the occasional question as it came. One of the detectives came back, a small black object in his hands, his eyes focused on me. "Sir, do you have a cat?" Sitting up, I stared at the detective's find, a small black collar with a red clover-shaped tag on it. I knew the name that was engraved there, remembered the day I'd bought him this collar and how much he'd hated it, until finally he'd accepted it with the same mild disinterest he showed everything I forced on him. I did. "Where did you find that?" "Oh," the detective replied and handed the collar to me. "Sorry, it was on the floor in the kitchen. You said Mrs. Blakely was here on the day she disappeared. Was it typical for her to leave things like this lying on the floor?" "I'm not sure. Like I said, I was sick. I didn't leave my room the entire day." I said. "I see," he said as his partner returned from searching the garage. They conferred at a distance while I sat there, holding that small black collar. I ran my fingers over the engraving and stared into space as they spoke in whispers. In the end, the detectives left with a promise that they'd be in touch. I could have told them that looking for Janine was pointless, that they'd never find a trace of her. But what would have been the point? I'd be arrested as a suspect, and eventually let go when they couldn't find a trace of evidence to convict, and all the while that damned clock would tick away. Unable to go back to sleep and desperate for a little peace and quiet for the first time in days, I headed out. My little suburban neighborhood lets out into a rustic downtown area, a single main street lined with rows of locally owned shops. Half the shops are closed now, but not too many years ago it was a place where weekenders would come down to peruse antiques and enjoy homemade ice cream on hot summer days. It was the easygoing charm of that street that convinced me to buy my house. Walking down those streets and seeing the normalcy of it, I could almost forget what waited for me at home. The collar hung from my fingertips, the light jingle of metal making sure I didn't forget. As I passed by Phil's Emporium, a small dusty store where I'd bought a hand-carved humidor for my dad 5 years ago, I heard it. Tick, tick, tick. Not a loud, jarring sound like the ticking of the old German clock, but the gentle, comforting tick of a well-made Swiss pocket watch sitting behind the glass case next to a modern digital clock. It was a sing-song sound. It was a comforting sound. I found myself lost in it, entranced with and comforted by the sound of a clock for the first time in my life. I bought it immediately and carried it home to me to sit next to the old German clock. As quiet as it was, that ticking watch seemed to quiet the old clock, adding a musical backdrop to the old monstrosity that made it less threatening. That night I slept a little easier. The nightmares were still there, but distant. That was 6 months ago. They never found Janine, and the detectives never got in touch. I never found my cat, and I don't think I'll ever replace him. I've bought more clocks in the time. Not just clocks. Anything that keeps time is fair game, but I have an entire room filled with clocks. Antique clocks, clocks built into coffee tables, big grandfather clocks, and tiny 3D printed clocks from a specialty shop in Austin. And at the very center of it all, ticking away quietly amongst 100 other noisy clocks, is an old German wall clock, the pride and joy of my collection. My school shooter was just released from prison. I was the only survivor, and I think he wants me dead. Life's not easy when at just 16 years old. Half the people you know are murdered. I was always high, driving carelessly, and skipping classes every other day. Ironically, that's what saved my life. I was cheating on my girlfriend with her best friend Joan that day. On the fateful morning, I skipped all the classes, but Joan decided to go for the last period. She was the first person to find the dead and mangled bodies all around. Every single corpse was missing something. A leg, an eye, a kidney, and so on. Poor beautiful Joan didn't resist the survivor's guilt and took her own life just a few weeks later. I thought it couldn't get any worse, but I never could have guessed how horrifyingly wrong I was. My parents were desperate to give me a new start. I was only a high school sophomore and had my whole life ahead of me, so we moved across the country. I decided to seize the opportunity to really start over, stop making my parents worry, and be a good boy. I promised myself I'd be a better person. I love my parents so much, and I'd do anything for them. They have a lot to lose by moving to a new city, but they still did it for me. This was a real wake-up call to make me get rid of my toxic behavior. The most shocking thing about the shooting, and what surprised everyone the most, was the shooter's identity. Lucas Rhines was smart and nice, one of those easygoing guys that can be seen hanging out with anyone. He was never bullied, violent, or anything. He was one of the 3 most brilliant students from our year. Lucas was always involved in charity or events to help the school team. We were never close, but I would never expect that from him. The tragic explanation came a few days after the shooting. Lucas had a mental breakdown that morning after finding out that both his parents had been killed in a car crash. Due to the tragic circumstances and his usual good character, Lucas was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Then his once again exceptional behavior granted him another reduction. In the end, he served merely 5 years for 28 murders. Lucas was released last November, and one by one the survivors from our former sophomore class are being killed, and I think I'm next. The first victim was Lana Armstrong. After surviving the shooting, Lana had moved from our hometown too, but still lived in the same state. Her death made national news because of the brutality. An 8-month-old pregnant woman was found dead in her own apartment, with both her hands severed. The second survivor to die was Brandon Davies, a former football player. Brandon was run over by a semi-truck, and one of his legs was nowhere to be found. His murder didn't get a lot of media coverage, but a cousin who still lived in the area told me about it. The news mentioned that Lana's death had a ritualistic pattern, but no one connected the dots about her death being related to Brandon's, and both being related to Lucas Rhines and the shooting 5 years ago. I myself only realized it when Camilla Darwin, a girl from my school who I was friends with, was found dead, and her 2 eyes had been extracted. There was no doubt. Lucas was back to finish the job he had started. I know that 3 brutal murders should have made me panic, but I didn't worry too much about my safety because I was living over 10 states away. It would be so much easier to simply pursue closer targets, like he'd been doing so far, but making this assumption was a mistake. After Camilla, Lucas came for me. I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by the horrible scratch of long nails against the metal of my doorknob. The smell of decaying flesh hit my nostrils almost simultaneously. There was no adrenaline rush in the world that could keep me from falling on the floor in a pool of my own vomit. As the 3 figures entered my room, I let out a scream I'd been holding for over 5 years. Lucas was escorted by the walking, rotten corpses of a couple that had been in their 40s before dying. They hobbled unnaturally, leaving a trail of dead matter. I recognized their faces immediately because I saw them on the night before the shooting, in the car crash that killed them. Joan didn't like me to drive drunk and high, so she fought me and took the wheel. But she was inexperienced, barely starting to learn how to drive. She couldn't hit the brakes fast enough when a big truck changed lanes dangerously and cut off the car in front of us. We smashed our front bumper against their rear. We were unhurt, so I assumed the people in the other car didn't take much damage either. I was 16. I thought I was invincible. I thought death was something that only happened to other people, far from my sight, or to really old grandfathers. I told Joan we had to leave or we would be in trouble, and I saw their faces for a fraction of a second as she drove away trembling. I felt like we were in slow motion, as my senses registered everything with a sharpness they didn't usually have. The 2 of them, Mr. and Mrs. Rhines, the couple in the other car, were undoubtedly dead. I vaguely thought they would be fine, but we wouldn't, because my girl was driving her mother's car even though she still didn't have a permit. We didn't stop to help. We were scared. I was a coward. They were still alive when we left them. They could have survived if we didn't run away. Instead, a second vehicle crashed into them. It was late at night and a dark road. I only learned this part of the story after they visited me last November, and to this day, I still don't know what happened to the other driver. That night, I told Joan we'd sort things out in the morning. She was crying and obviously couldn't sleep a wink. She was a mess the next day. I tried to keep calm and rational and fix everything. I truly thought the only problem at hand was pretending that we weren't in the crash. We were getting rid of her mother's car as Lucas received the news. We were calling the insurance company pretending that the car was stolen as he maddened by his pain, started loading every gun in his house. I was calming Joan down and telling her we would be fine, as Lucas mercilessly slaughtered half the people we knew. Joan was miserable. I was miserable too, but we still didn't know whether the people in the crash had lived or died. I know now that Joan did find out what happened way sooner than me. She had to know, and the answer was why she took her life, not the shooting. Not only the shooting, at least. She went through so much because of me. Everyone went through so much. So when Lucas and the zombies of Mr. and Mrs. Rhines entered my room, I begged for my life. I did it because I thought being killed by them wasn't enough to atone for what I've done to them. I offered to help Lucas with his plan, killing people and using their body parts to replace his parents, cutting their limbs and organs off right after death, preserving them on ice, researching old witchcraft and rituals, sewing them on his parents' decaying bodies. I've done it again and again, and now the Rhines couple is almost completely brand new. They just need new hearts to function again, almost like they never died. I offered mine for one of them, so this is goodbye. I convinced my wife she only had a few weeks to live. She didn't react the way I expected. You might think I'm a horrible person, but if I told you the type of pranks she's been pulling on me in the past few months, I guarantee you would do the same thing. Last August, after my mom got hit by an 18-wheeler, she secretly signed up for ventriloquism lessons so that during the funeral she could throw her voice and yell, "Get me out of here, I'm still alive, damn it," while the pallbearers lowered the casket. Or there was the time she tricked me into thinking I'd won the lottery. That alone I might have laughed off, except she also convinced me to call my very married boss and tell him the whole department knows he's banging his secretary at the office Christmas party. So I've been looking for a little payback, you might say. Just last week, Stacy came down with a ferocious migraine, and 3 days in bed with a damp rag across her head didn't help one bit, so off to the hospital we went. From across the desk in his cramped office, Dr. Mercer said she needed a brain scan. He also suggested that, in his professional opinion, we should brace ourselves for the worst. Time slowed down while we waited for the diagnosis. Adrift and forlorn, we held each other for hours on end while the seconds ticked by on the clock above the mantelpiece. Oh sure, my beloved kept a brave face, but any time she returned from her solo walks, her eyes would be all red and puffed out. Well, this morning, Dr. Mercer finally called while Stacy was at the store. He used the landline because she hadn't answered her mobile. "So what's the diagnosis?" I asked, my stomach folding itself in knots. Again and again he insisted he couldn't discuss the case with anyone besides the patient. Although 10 minutes of groveling wore him down, he sighed, lowered his voice, then said he had a hunch Stacy and I would have cause for celebration this Valentine's Day. All joy seeped back into the world. I thanked the doc a million times before collapsing into the chair, an idea for a prank already blooming in my mind. And boy was it a doozy. At the lounge table I rubbed my eyes until they turned all bloodshot, and then practiced my sullen face. Soon I heard little Missa Loves to Prank come through the front door, kick off her shoes and shuffle along the hall. As she stepped into the room I looked up without saying a single word. A hand shot up over her mouth. I swallowed a gulp. Then, in a thin, weak voice I said, "Dr. Mercer called. Is it bad?" Rather than answer, I simply pretended to sob into my hands. Stacy didn't burst into tears or scream, nor did she collapse on the floor. Instead, she let out a deep sigh and threw her head back. On the wall beside the window stood a dark wooden cabinet. She went over to it, slid open the bottom drawer and lifted out this huge metal trunk. I stood up. "Everything okay?" The trunk had a combination lock. Once Stacy rolled the numbers into place, the latch opened with a little click. "Do you love me?" she asked over her shoulder. Still in character, I said, "Of course I love you. I'll always love you. And we're gonna get..." "Then drink this." She spun around, holding out a whiskey bottle. I craned my neck to peek inside the trunk and glimpsed a pair of handcuffs and a red bow tie before she blocked my view. "I bought it for a special occasion," she said. I stepped forward, arms outstretched. "Listen, no matter what, we're gonna get through this mess together. Just drink it," she snapped. "Please, it's important. If you love me, you'll drink it." Was this a joke? I searched her face for answers, finding none. But hell, who was I to judge? Everybody processes grief in their own individual way. "Sure, honey." I grabbed the bottle from her and took a long swig, my insides already warming. 5 seconds later, the floor rose up to meet me. Darkness swallowed the lounge and everything in it. My next memory is of the words, "I love you," drifting toward me from the end of a long tunnel. There was pressure inside my skull. I tried moving, couldn't. My hands had been cuffed behind my back, and my ankles were bound together by a length of rope. I was propped up on the sofa in a tux. Through the haze, I saw two Stacys orbit one another, both wearing her favorite dress, that red off-the-shoulder number. In her right hand, she had a pistol. Where did that come from? Her voice echoed on and on as she told me she'd prepared for this day years ago, that she couldn't bear the thought of me carrying on without her and starting a new family. Although I dipped in and out of consciousness, the words, "We have to go together," kept stinging my ears. I thrashed around, unable to speak. The best my drooling mouth could manage was slurred, random syllables. Stacy sat beside me and pressed her right temple against my left, the pistol angled in such a way one shot would tear through both our frontal lobes. Oh shit, did she plan on killing us? My attempts to beg her to wait came out as a nonsensical gurgle. Squeezing those beautiful green eyes of hers shut, Stacy said, "Goodbye, Frank. I love you so much." By now enough of the brain fog had lifted that I could mutter, "It was a prank." She stopped breathing, tensed up. "What?" I took several quick short breaths. "It's a prank. Dr. Mercer said you'll be fine, so I set you up, as payback for the lottery thing." For almost a minute neither of us said a word, the room thick with tension. Then forcing a smile she said, "Well duh. She stood. Did you really think I was going to kill us both? I knew you were full of crap the second I walked in. You're the worst actor in the world. I just turned the prank around on you. Ha ha ha. The way she said this, every word steeped in sincerity, made the statement swing all the way back towards hollow. She crossed the room and slipped the gun into the trunk before returning with a key to unlock my cuffs. Oh well, that's a relief about the diagnosis. We should celebrate. How about we order Thai tonight? After she loosened the rope, I got up, rubbing my chafed wrist, my vision blurred and my throat dry. Sounds great. Perfect. With that, she smiled, stood on her tiptoes, lifted my chin with a finger, gave me a quick kiss, and then disappeared into the kitchen. My shirt was a drenched rag against my chest. Had it really been a prank? Surely drugging me was a step too far even for her. Just then, the phone wailed. It sounded painfully loud inside my aching skull. Dr. Mercer was on the line, and this time his voice parried a distinct sour note. Frank, I'm really sorry, but there's been a mix-up with the results. Can you have Stacy call me as soon as possible? It's urgent. The room tilted from side to side, the ground shifting beneath my feet. My better half came back through the door and said, "Who was that, honey?" I hung up and swallowed the lump in my throat. Wrong number. When I got hired as a security guard, they gave me a horrifying set of rules. I've never been a security guard. I only applied for this job so I wouldn't get kicked out of my apartment for failing to pay rent. It was a night shift and it paid pretty well, so I figured I might as well give it a shot. I could still hunt for another job while this one kept a roof over my head. The security gig was at a long-term storage facility, a place you'd expect things to be stashed away for years on end. I got to the front office and knocked, and when I didn't get a response, I just walked on in. My security jacket was folded on the desk, along with a sticky note saying that they were doing a quick sweep of the red lockers and would be back soon. In the meantime, I should familiarize myself with the rule book. I got comfy in one of the threadbare chairs and cracked open the leather book with the word "Rules" on the cover. Hello, new security officer. Welcome to Bram's Secure Storage. Take the time to familiarize yourself with these rules, learn them well, and you'll have a long and fruitful career with us. 1. Be sure to clock in the moment you enter and clock out the moment you leave so we know if you're still here or not. Oops, should have known to do that. Luckily, the old-timey card machine was right there, so I signed a new card and punched it in real quick before getting back to the rules. 2. Each security level of our facility is designated by color, going from minimum to maximum security. Green, yellow, blue, red, violet, and black. Still, take care in watching over them. No matter what their security level is, you don't want to be taken by surprise. The color thing made me chuckle. Sure, someone's really going to pay out the ass to protect their knickknacks in the black lockers. Whatever. They're money to throw away. 3. Keep an eye on the cameras. Do not spend more than a minute watching a single location. Flip through them regularly. Fair enough. I skidded my chair over to the computers and started clicking the button. The dinosaur of a computer screen went fuzzy for a second before it changed to a different camera. I got a good chuckle out of seeing that the red lockers were actually painted red. 4. The nights are long. You may think you hear something inside of the lockers. Do not look inside, it's just a rat. Kinda weird phrasing, but fine. 5. Violet lockers are protected by a voice lock and need a specific password. To open these lockers, whisper the password into the lock itself and wait for the screaming to stop before you open it. Only open them if the requirements in Section F hooded figures are met. What? I almost laughed out loud at that. Screaming? What was this, some kind of a joke? Nonetheless, I kept reading. 6. If someone breaks into the facility, do not interfere. Lock yourself in the office and only observe from the cameras. Any mess left behind will be handled by the janitorial staff in the morning. Mess? What the hell? Wasn't my job to keep an eye on things? Shouldn't I be calling the cops or getting in the way or something? My head spun around and around. 7. If there is a disruption in the green or yellow lockers, refer to Section B of this book. If there is a disruption in the blue lockers, refer to Section C. Do not wait for your partner to return. They won't be the same if they do. Refer to Section Alpha and wait until the janitorial staff come for their shift in the morning. Even with my head spinning, something in Rule 7 hit me like a train. I flashed through the security camera feeds again, confirming something I'd only noted absent-mindedly. None of the other lockers were colored, only the red lockers. And not all of the red lockers. It was feed red 2 that had the red-stained lockers. I managed to figure out how to make the cameras move down just enough to reveal the floor, which was also dark red. And I saw a hand just at the corner of the frame lying still. Too still. Shit. I almost bolted out of the room trying and see if there was anything I could do for that poor guy. But then I remembered the whole rule. Don't go alone. My predecessor had clearly already made that mistake and look where it got him. So instead I locked the door and headed back to the desk. I'd made the right choice. I saw my coworker's whole body now being dragged down the hallway by something. I couldn't tell exactly what it was. The camera quality just went to shit, but it was big, hairy, and it was heading right back to an open locker door. It pulled the body in and slammed its door shut with a thud loud enough I could hear it from my office. I glanced at the rule book and picked it up. It was going to be a long night locked up in here. I'd better catch up on my reading. I'd already picked up on one important thing. I wasn't there to keep people out. I was here to keep something, or more than one something, in. I attended my mother's funeral a week ago. I just found out the coffin was empty, dead outside our front door. That was how my mother was found one dreary September morning. Murdered, the police say, but no one to pin the crime to. Looking back, I should have taken the signs more seriously. My mother was constantly looking out the window into the woods, biting her nails nervously as if something out there worried her. She even checked the doors every night to make sure they were locked tight after dinner. My father and I brushed it off as perhaps just a simple paranoia, but obviously it wasn't. Looking at her state, you wouldn't think it was the work of the killer due to the absence of any wounds or abrasions on her skin. Instead, she'd been suffocated. Saying that my world was absolutely ripped away from me would be an understatement. At that time in my life, I didn't think things could become more horrendous than they already were, but I couldn't have been more wrong. In fact, the death of my mother would be the least of my problems. Since my mother had not been brutally disfigured in any way, my father decided the funeral would be an open casket. I must say, as much as I missed my mother and wanted her back, I didn't want to see her in a state of death. I already unwillingly had to when I left to get the mail that morning, and it left a feeling inside my stomach that I don't think I'll ever get to go away. It was the night before the funeral that I first heard the tapping. It started around 10 o'clock p.m., and it was coming from right outside my window. Tap, 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 tap. The tapping pattern came in pairs of two. At first I thought it might be a branch bumping up against the pane until the thought entered my head. Could it be the killer? My whole body tensed up, and it felt as if my heart was beating in my head. Without thinking it all the way through, I ripped my curtains open to observe what was producing the noise. I stared through my window, and to my surprise I saw nothing. Just the wide open backyard and the forest outline. I decided it must have been a small animal or something, and I rolled back over to sleep. I prayed the whole morning that the funeral would be normal, that things would be okay, and that I would feel some sort of closure on the whole matter. However, something happened that turned my world upside down. Everyone was sitting when Father Andy opened the coffin to reveal my mother, or where my mother should have been at least. To all of our horror, the coffin was completely empty. I remember everyone standing up all at once as if an electric current had gone through all of our seats at the same time. In a second, the room turned from silent to filled with gasps and cries of rage. It was clear as day. She'd been taken. My father was on the phone all night with the funeral home and the police. Another investigation for my mother was on its way, and they hadn't even solved the first one. The funeral had obviously been postponed, and I was starting to feel numb from it all. That night it happened again. The tapping resurfaced, the same time as last, 10 p.m. I awoke to the sound of it coming from my window. Tap, 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 tap. My heart leaped up into my throat. Not again. I pulled my pillow over my head and did my best to go back to sleep. Tap, 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 tap. It was as if the tapping was getting louder. My fear turned to aggression very quickly, and I threw my pillow off of my head. I pounded my fist up against the pane, still guarded by my curtains. Knock it off, I yelled. The noise stopped. I breathed a sigh of relief and brought my pillow back up to its spot. Tap, 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 tap. Are you kidding me? I didn't get the rest of the sentence out of my mouth as the horrible realization came over me. The tapping wasn't coming from outside my window, it was coming from inside my closet. Without another second passing, I found myself trembling in fear, pushed up against my bedroom wall. Whatever was inside must have been figured out. I knew it was there as my door began to slowly creak open. I had several guesses of what could be hiding on the other side, but not in a million years would I have guessed what was actually the true cause of the noise. Standing in the doorframe was no other than my mother. Mom? My voice squeaked. The longer I stared at her, the more she looked unreal. Like when you're staring at an AI that looks almost human, but isn't quite. Her mouth turned upward into a wide grin, and very quickly I knew it was not the same mother that I remembered. The thing took a step towards me, and what I saw made me sick to my stomach. It was a person wearing my mom's skin. It took another step towards me, and I further pushed myself up against the wall. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I was frozen in fear. It's all right, darling. Their voice was a mix of my mother and what sounded like an ancient old man. We can be together now. As the person neared closer to me, they began peeling my mother's skin flesh off of their own, revealing their true face. However, it wasn't human. I can't describe it, but the creature that stared back at me was unlike anything I'd ever seen. I now know why, for all those years, my mother was so paranoid about what lay in the woods. What are you? I asked as it closed in on me, my mother's skin oozing off of its own flesh like slime. I took the window of time that I had left and pushed past the thing, running into the hallway. At the very end of it, my dad stood staring at me. Thank God, I thought. Dad, run, get help now. Instead of running, my dad only smiled, or tried to at least. Even his skin seemed to struggle to cooperate. He wasn't moving, he was just smiling. I heard more tapping behind me. It got closer and I ran as fast down the stairs as I possibly could. As soon as I was halfway down the stairs, someone grabbed my arm. I turned. It was my father's skin. Someone grabbed my other arm. It was my mother's skin. I couldn't move. Their grip was inescapable. They both leaned up to my separate ears, whispering the same exact thing. It's okay, darling. We can be together now. Be extremely careful what your kids watch on YouTube. Maybe I'm just old. Maybe I just assumed because there was specifically an app called YouTube Kids that it was perfectly safe for my kids to watch. That's a perfectly logical assumption to make. At least I thought so. God, was I wrong? I have my 3 kids, James, who is 9, and the twins, Olivia and Owen, who are 7. Oftentimes they get so wound up and excited that they forget to use their heads, and this time they really did. Owen was the only one who really tried to talk to me about what he was watching on YouTube, but James would always shut him up. I have to admit, I was guilty of only half listening to what he was talking about. I didn't really care what guy played what game or the conundrums of an annoying British pig. It was somewhat of a relief when he stopped talking about it all. No more pig stories, no more gaming adventures. If anything, He seemed less interested in his tablet in general, more inclined to socialize when I was in the room rather than watch some odd video. Maybe I should have read more into that, but hindsight is 20/20, and at the moment, I didn't think much of it. I only caught a glimpse of the new show he was watching yesterday. I popped into his room to let him know it was time for dinner. Obviously, James was on his tablet, and he was completely absorbed in what he was watching. I was at just the right angle to see what was going on. It was another animated show. Not surprising. The stars of this one appeared to be this fluffy white lamb and a black goat with a serious case of resting bitch face. The sheep was preparing a sandwich for lunch while singing in an ear-splitting voice about how it was good to feed others. James jumped out of his skin and turned off his tablet. "Dad, what are you doing in here?" James actually sounded embarrassed, like he was caught doing something he shouldn't have, which is not a look I was not unfamiliar with back in my youthful days. "It's time for dinner, kiddo. What you watching?" I asked, just to show. "I'm starved." James shoved his tablet under his pillow and dashed out of the room, not able to look me in the eye. Now that was suspicious. James was quiet, yeah, but he wasn't secretive. I decided to let it go for that night. However, I had the next day off of work, and my concern for my son was starting to overwhelm me, so I broke a dad code D and let myself into James' tablet to check his YouTube Kids history. The show was called Sheep and Goat Creative. It was all James had been watching for literal weeks. I scrolled back and all the thumbnails were of the happy-go-lucky sheep and the clearly unimpressed goat. Sheep and goat volunteer to feed the homeless. Sheep and goat go for a walk. Sheep and goat sail on a boat. Sheep and goat this, sheep and goat that. It all seemed normal enough, but James's reaction from the night before, it just seemed weird. So I decided to watch the one he was watching last night, Sheep and Goat Make Lunch. It started normal. There was some cheery royalty-free music playing in the background. Sheep's voice was grating on my eardrums as he described his favorite kind of sandwich, filled with butter and anchovies. He piled an obscene amount of tiny fish onto the bread before plopping another slice on top. "Time to eat," he squawked, opening his mouth to take a bite. I found myself thinking, God, I hope that sheep shuts the hell up soon. It was then that the goat, who hadn't really done anything but stand there with no expression, grabbed the sandwich and crammed the entire disgusting thing down Sheep's throat. Sheep's eyes bugged out his skull as he tried to shove Goat off of him, but the goat didn't budge, forcing Sheep's mouth shut so the sheep had to swallow an entire sandwich in one go. Normally in cartoons, this is where we'd see a sandwich-shaped lump go down Sheep's throat. That didn't happen. As he would in real life, Sheep choked. He gasped and gagged, clearly trying to spit the lump of sandwich out of his throat, but he couldn't. Goat went back to sitting to the side like nothing was the matter, now taking the time to make his own sandwich, a much more civilized peanut butter and jelly. Sheep slowly sank behind the counter, where his choking grew quieter and quieter, until it just came to a horrid stop. Goat looked up at the camera, and for the first time in the video, he spoke. "See you next time." That was it. There weren't even credits. The video just ended. I felt sick. The choking sounded so real. No wonder James was embarrassed he was caught. He knew he shouldn't be watching things like this. I knew we had to talk tonight about this, but before we did that, I needed to know all I could about Sheep and Goat, so I clicked on another video, the one with them on the boat. Again, it started normal. Sheep and Goat were sailing in the ocean, Sheep caterwauling about some nonsense about how gorgeous the water was. Halfway through the episode, Goat shoved Sheep's ass into the water, where the sheep screamed and cried as he did his best to tread water, but after a few minutes, he sunk like a stone. Once again, Goat looked up at the camera and blankly told us that he'd see you next time, and the video ended. I was disgusted. I clicked on the volunteer video. At first, they were just feeding poor underfed-looking rabbits and chickens, but when the stew pot went empty, Goat tossed Sheep into the pot and shut the lid over him. Sheep screamed as he was burned to death inside of the pot. Once he was dead, Goat opened up the pot and started cutting off slices, tossing burnt wool and rare meat onto the plates of the hungry. See you next time. I hated it. I wanted to stop, but I clicked on the next one anyway, the one where they were going on a walk. I knew what to expect by now. That cheery, stupid music, Sheep's annoying as hell voice grating my eardrums as they skipped down a path and up a hill. Goat just quietly followed along, not speaking, not making any expression. Once they were up there, Goat attacked Sheep. He tackled him to the ground and beat him with a block of wood. Once Sheep was unconscious, Goat grabbed a hammer and nails. This time Goat actually smiled as he pressed one of the nails right above Sheep's hoof. Goat slammed the hammer down just as my phone began to ring, but I couldn't pause in time to avoid hearing Sheep's blood-curdling scream. I turned off the tablet and swallowed the bile coming up my throat. This was terrible. James needed help. A therapist at the very least, if not a full inpatient stay for juvenile psychopaths. I grabbed my phone and saw it was coming from the kids' school. I answered, trying to ignore that feeling of dread that crept up my spine. "Hello, Thompson residence? Mr. Thompson, you need to come down to the school right away." My heart dropped into my stomach. "What happened?" "Your son James left the school premises during recess. He brought his little brother with him. We can't find them. Your daughter Olivia said they were going on a walk."